In the heart of a big African city, there lived a young man named Yusuf. He was known for his kind heart and gentle spirit, yet he bore a burden unlike any other. Yusuf was cursed with the sight of death. Whenever he would gaze upon a woman with love in his heart, tragedy would inevitably follow, as she would perish the very next day. This mysterious affliction had plagued Yusuf for years, leaving him bewildered and isolated, unable to understand its cause or find a solution. As the sun rose over the city, casting its warm glow upon the bustling streets, Yusuf awoke to another day filled with uncertainty and fear. He had learned to keep his distance from others, for fear of inadvertently causing harm with his cursed gaze. Yet, despite his best efforts to avoid love and attachment, Yusuf longed for companionship and connection like any other young man his age. As he ventured out into the city, Yusuf could not shake the feeling of isolation that weighed heavily upon his heart. Everywhere he looked, he saw couples strolling hand in hand, families laughing and playing in the streets, while he remained a solitary figure cursed to keep his distance from the ones he longed to love. When he got back home that day, he prayed to have a pain-free night. He always had a recurring dream that haunted him night after night, a dream that seemed to hold the key to his mysterious affliction, but whose meaning always seemed to escape his grasp. In this dream, Yusuf always found himself standing before his mother, her gentle voice tinged with concern, as she questioned his lack of romantic involvement. "My son," she would say, "you are almost 30, and not once have you had anything to do with a woman. Is there something wrong somewhere?" But as always, as he makes to answer her, he will see that her eyes have transformed before him, morphing into a twisted sight of an evil old witch. Holding his face in her hands, she will say viciously, "Yusuf, Yusuf, for not seeing my daughter as one worthy of you. Your eyes will never see good. Your sight shall become like that of the vulture. For the vulture sees and knows only death. So shall your sight be. Any girl you behold with affection shall become like death. Your sight will give you no pleasure henceforth." Yusuf would always spring up from the bed at this point, drenched in sweat. He could feel the weight of her curse pressing down upon him, the realization dawning upon him like a thunderclap. The strange woman's voice had not been mere figment of his imagination. It had been a grim prophecy, a curse cast upon him by some unknown force. As Yusuf sat in his bed, yet another night of nightmare, he wrestled with the revelation of his cursed fate. He felt a mixture of fear and anger coursing through his veins. How could he have been so blind to the truth all these years? And what could he possibly do to break free from the shackles of his cursed sight? He questioned as at last the dream began to make sense. And with a heavy heart, Yusuf knew that he could no longer ignore the truth that had been laid bare before him. He was destined to walk a path of loneliness and isolation, his heart forever burdened by the knowledge that his gaze brought only death and despair. But even in the darkest depth of despair, Yusuf held onto a glimmer of hope, a flickering light that refused to be extinguished. For somewhere out there, he knew, lay the key to breaking the curse that had bound him for so long, and he was determined to find it, no matter the cost. So each night, Yusuf found himself consumed by fear and uncertainty, his mind plagued by the haunting memory of his recurring dream. The very thought of sleep filled him with dread. For he knew that upon closing his eyes, he would once again be thrust into the terrifying realm of his subconscious, where the strange woman's curse loomed like a dark shadow over his soul. In the quiet solitude of his room, Yusuf struggled with the conflicting emotions that raged within him. He knew deep down that his mother was not a witch. She was the kindest and warmest person he knows, who had only ever wished for his happiness and well-being. And so, as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, Yusuf's isolation only deepened, his fear of his cursed sight driving him further and further away from those he held dear. He avoided seeing any female relatives, fearing that his gaze would bring about their untimely demise, even though he had yet to witness the full extent of his curse's power upon those of his own blood. But Yusuf was not willing to take the risk, and so Yusuf lived a life of quiet desperation, his days filled with longing and regret, his nights consumed by the torment of his recurring dreams. He yearned for companionship and connection, yet he knew that to love another would be to invite nothing but pain and suffering into their lives. But amidst the darkness that threatened to engulf him, Yusuf clung to a sliver of hope, a glimmer of light that refused to be extinguished. For deep within his heart he knew that somewhere out there a solution awaited him, a way to break free from the curse that has bound him for so long, and he was determined to find it, no matter the obstacles that lay in his path. He had taken the decision to leave the country some 7 years ago, and ever since he had not gone back to see his parents or siblings, but he is doing financially well, so he ensures they were well taken care of, and he speaks with his parents and other family members every day on the phone. But each time they asked him of his plans to come home, he had always cited work as a constraint. But more recently, his mother was beginning to lose patience with that excuse, and he doesn't know what else to do now. The ever-present question of returning home weighed heavily upon his heart, a constant reminder of the rift that had formed between him and his loved ones. With each passing day, Yusuf felt the pressure mounting as his mother's patience wore thin. Her gentle inquiries about his plans to come home now carried a hint of frustration, a silent plea for him to bridge the divide that had grown between them over the years. And yet, Yusuf found himself at a loss, unable to bring himself to face the truth of his cursed existence. As he paced back and forth in his apartment, the weight of duty pressing down upon him like a leaden mantle, Yusuf knew that he could no longer hide behind the excuse of work. His mother deserved better than that. She deserved to know the truth that had driven him to exile himself from his own homeland. But the thought of returning home filled Yusuf with a deep sense of dread. For he knew that to confront his family would be to confront the very essence of his cursed existence. How could he look into the eyes of his mother, knowing that his gaze may bring about her death? How could he bear to see the pain and sorrow etched upon the faces of those he held dear? Yet, even as doubt and fear threatened to overwhelm him, Yusuf knew that he could no longer continue to hide from the truth. He owed it to his family, to himself also, to confront the curse that had plagued him for so long, and to seek out answers that had eluded him for years. So, with a heavy heart and a determined resolve, Yusuf made the decision to return home, knowing that the journey ahead would be fraught with danger and uncertainty, but also there could be a hope of redemption and salvation. With this decision to return home firm in his heart, he was able to sleep that night without the dream plaguing him. He woke up surprised but refreshed and happy. That alone gave him the assurance that he was on the right track with his decision to go back home. As he awoke to the golden light of dawn streaming through his window, Yusuf felt a sense of clarity and determination wash over him. He wasted no time in setting his plan into motion. throwing himself into work with renewed vigor and dedication. Day and night he labored tirelessly, pouring his heart and soul into completing his projects with the utmost efficiency and precision. As an independent contractor skilled in both software and hardware, Yusuf knew that he had to tie up loose ends and ensure that his affairs were in order before embarking on this life journey home. Despite his best efforts, it still took Yusuf 3 long months to prepare for his return home. The days blurred together as he worked tirelessly to meet his deadlines, his mind consumed by thought of the family he had left behind and the uncertain future that awaited him. But as the day of his departure drew near, Yusuf felt a sense of excitement building within him, but with a stab of fear. He knew that the road ahead would not be easy, that he would face challenges and obstacles at every point. But he also knew that he would not be alone anymore. He will have with him the love and support of his family, surrounding him every step of that way. With a heart full of hope, Yusuf set out finally on his return home, ready to confront whatever demons of his past that had plagued him and also to forge a new path forward. He ended up notifying only his younger brother and another male cousin who was more of a brother of his coming. He decided not to tell his dad because he knows the man might be too excited to hide it from his wife, and he doesn't want the females in his family knowing until he knows for sure that they were safe. So, on the appointed day, he went to the airport to board his flight. When he arrived, his brother and cousin were already waiting for him. He was taken to the hotel room that was booked for him, but as the warmth of reunion filled the air, Yusuf savored the precious moments spent with his younger brother and cousin, their laughter and friendship easing the burden that had weighed upon his soul for so long. Yet, amidst the joy of that reunion, Yusuf knew that he could no longer keep the truth hidden from those he loved. So after a restful night's sleep, Yusuf gathered his brothers around him, the weight of his confession heavy upon his heart. With a deep breath, he began to recount the tale of his cursed sight, the revelation of the strange woman's curse, and the decision that had led him to return home after so many years of exile. At first, his brothers listened in stunned silence, their faces a marks of disbelief, because what they were hearing was too alien to be termed true. But as Yusuf spoke, pouring out his heart and soul to them, they began to understand the gravity of his plight, the immense burden that he had carried for so long without their knowledge. He spoke of his longing to be reunited with his family, yet his fear of bringing harm upon them with his cursed gaze. And as he spoke, he felt a weight lifting from his shoulders, and the darkness that had clouded his mind for so long slowly giving way to light and hope. For in the bonds of brotherhood, he found the strength to confront his fears. After they had brainstormed the whole morning into the afternoon on what to do, they came to an unanimous conclusion that their parents must be told. But there still lies the fear of the curse. But they decided to bring their dad first to the hotel, and then they can know what to do from there. Ali, Yusuf's younger brother, set out to fetch their father, his heart heavy with the knowledge of the burden that awaited him. He had rehearsed the conversation 100 times in his mind, yet the words still felt foreign in his tongue, the fear of his mother's reaction gnawing at his mind. So he came up with a plan. He got home and told his father he wanted to take him somewhere for a surprise. When their mom tried to find out what was going on, Ali told her jokingly it was a father and son thing. He succeeded, and with a heavy heart, Ali led his father to the hotel, where Yusuf awaited, with a mixture of hope and apprehension. As they entered the room, Yusuf's heart leaped into his throat, his eyes meeting those of his father with such longing, and his father's gaze held a profound sadness that mirrored Yusuf's own. As Yusuf's father listened to his son's harrowing tale, a storm of emotion raged within him. Anger smothered beneath the surface, a fiery ember ignited by the injustice of the curse that had robbed his son of his youth and innocence. After hearing what his son had been carrying all by himself, the elderly man felt sad and angry. Sad that their son didn't trust him or his wife enough to tell them all these years. If he had known, he would not have needed to run away from his homeland and his people. But now was not the time to cast blame. His son has made the wise decision to come home. Amidst the tumult of emotions, a strong resolve began to take root within the elder man's heart. For he knew that now was a time for action and determination. His son has shown immense courage in revealing the truth of the curse, and it was his duty as a father to stand by him and to support him in this time of need. With a sense of purpose driving him forward, Yusuf's father vowed to leave no stone unturned in his quest for answers. He would go to the ends of the earth if he had to in search of the solution to his son's plight. For he knew that the first step towards finding a cure was understanding the nature of the curse that had befallen them and the root cause of it. And so Mr. Adamu also agreed with his sons not to tell their mother, just to be on the safe side, until they were able to find out what really triggered such heavy curse on him. But one day, Ali was speaking with Yusuf on the phone, and their mother overheard the conversation. With a mixture of shock and disbelief, their mother had busted into the room that Ali was, demanding to know the meaning behind Ali's cryptic conversation, what he meant by going to see Yusuf. Ali caught off guard and unable to keep the secret anymore, because he couldn't outrightly lie to his mother, so he had no choice than to tell her everything. As the truth of Yusuf's plight was laid bare before her, their mother was overcome with a wave of grief and despair, her heart breaking at the thought of the suffering her beloved son had endured in silence for so many years. Tears streamed down her face unchecked as she collapsed to the ground, her sobs echoing through the room like a mournful lament. Words of comfort and reassurance fell on deaf ears as their mother's grief threatened to consume her pain too great to be assuaged by mere words. When she was able to gather her emotions, she demanded that her son must come home to her. Despite all the explanation concerning the risk involved, Mrs. Aisha stood her ground, that if he doesn't come home, she will go round every hotel in the city looking for him until she finds him. The only thing capable of keeping her son away from her was death. There is no curse laid by any man or spirit that has the power to triumph over her as his mother. And with that, she got up to carry out her threat. When they saw that she was serious, they had no choice than to call Yusuf to come home. Yusuf agreed to his mother's demands, knowing that to defy her would only bring about more pain and anguish for them all. And so, with a sense of trepidation, he made the journey back home, his mind filled with conflicting emotions, as he prepared to face the truth of his cursed existence once more. As Yusuf stepped through the threshold of his childhood home, he was enveloped in the warm embrace of his mother, her tears mingling with his own as they stood together in a moment of profound reunion. And in that moment, surrounded by the love and support of his family, Yusuf knew that no curse, no matter how powerful or insidious, could ever hope to triumph over the unyielding bonds of a mother's love. As the sun set on the horizon, casting its golden glow upon the world below, Yusuf and his family stood together, united in their determination to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that with love and perseverance, they would overcome even the darkest of curses, emerging stronger and more resilient than ever before. Now, as a family, unbroken and united, they put heads together, and the first question Mrs. Aisha, their mother, asked her son was when he started seeing the dream and when he began to notice that any girl he liked ended up dying. Yusuf told her the dream started after Ali's 10th birthday, But they were not really consistent like it is now. But casting his mind back, he believed the death began with Amina, his girl crush in his senior secondary school. And as it took him a long time to get over her, he never attributed her death to any curse, but he definitely remembers now that she died after he began to have the dream. This fresh knowledge added to his already burdened conscience of the other four women who had died because of him. He only began to suspect when the third lady died, but the fourth that confirmed everything for him died mistakenly because he thought by not telling her she would be safe. But the moment he realized he loved her, he had met her at the supermarket, and the following day he heard that she died in her sleep the night before. He had become devastated, not knowing what to do. That was when he made the decision to leave the country to avoid destroying his own family too. And he had begun to live a life devoid of any interaction with other people. As Yusuf recounted the timeline of events to his mother, a heavy silence settled over the room, each word weighing upon their heart like a stone. Mrs. Aisha listened intently, her eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and pain as she absorbed the gravity of her son's revelations. They put heads together and began to formulate a plan, determined to uncover the truth behind the curse that had plagued him for so long. With Mrs. Aisha leading the charge, they vowed to leave no stone unturned in their quest for answers, knowing that the key to breaking the curse lay hidden somewhere within the depths of their shared past. When everyone retired to bed, Mrs. Aisha remained seated in the parlor, casting her mind back to the day of her late 10th birthday, trying to remember as much as possible all that had transpired that day, wondering if there was a stranger she can't remember seeing or noticing, or is there anyone she doesn't know that came. The only thing that kept creeping back to her mind was an incident that transpired between her friend's daughter Hadiza and Yusuf. But it cannot be. No, it's not possible, Mrs. Aisha said, shaking her head. Mariam will never do such a thing against my son, she kept arguing with herself. The incident was that she had been discussing and enjoying the party with her friends Mrs. Mariam when they sighted their children Yusuf and Hadiza, talking, oblivious to everyone else around them. Mrs. Aisha had wondered at that time what they could be talking about so intently, but she had dismissed it, remembering that they had practically grown up in each other's house. So they were more of siblings than friends. But Mrs. Mariam had laughingly suggested that it would not be a bad idea if the two were engaged to be married when they are grown. Aisha had never fancied such arrangement for children that some families do, and she never wants it for any of her children because she strongly believes that children should be given their own space and opportunities to make their own mistakes and learn the lessons required. You cannot possibly protect them from everything, and she told her friends Mariam exactly that. But Mrs. Mariam had brought up the matter again when Yusuf came to collect something from his mom. Mrs. Mariam had jokingly asked him if he wanted to marry Hadiza in the future. The young Yusuf had immediately replied, God forbid. They had all laughed about it, especially Mrs. Mariam. But Aisha had rebuked her son right there and made him apologize to her friend for using such words. And at night she had called Yusuf to ask him why he said that about Hadiza. Yusuf had said that he doesn't understand why he will marry his own sister. Aisha had nodded and told him to go to bed, forgetting about the whole incident. So, could it be possible, Mrs. Aisha wondered, that there was more to that conversation than met the eye? Could Yusuf's vehement rejection of the idea of marrying Hadiza have triggered something deeper than she had taken then? What would she do? As she wrestled with this troubling thought, Mrs. Aisha couldn't shake the feeling that there was a connection between that conversation and the curse that had befallen her son. But try as she might, she couldn't recall anything out of the ordinary that happened other than that she just recalled. And yet, as the hours slipped by and the darkened night enveloped her, Mrs. Aisha made a solemn vow to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. For she knew that the key to breaking the curse that had plagued her son for so long lay hidden somewhere within the tangled web of the past. And so Mrs. Aisha went in search of her old friend, because strangely they had begun to grow apart after that day. But she never really paid attention to it or called it anything as a result of all that she had to take care of. But she remembered now that Mrs. Miriam had become withdrawn and never really visited like she used to. In a short time, they had relocated to another state, and Mrs. Aisha was never able to get the address from her. And so she had let her be, thinking that she may never need the address even. But now she really needs to find out where they are and how they can be reached. With a sense of urgency fueling her determination, Mrs. Aisha set out on a quest to locate her old friend, Mrs. Miriam, knowing that she might hold the key to unlocking the mysteries of the past and uncovering the truth behind her son's curse. Despite the passage of time and the distance that had grown between them, Mrs. Aisha refused to let anything stand in the way of her quest for answers and solutions. She reached out to mutual acquaintances and old neighbors, scouring her memory for any clue that might lead her to Mrs. Miriam's whereabouts. With each passing day, her resolve only strengthening. And then, after weeks of tireless searching and countless dead ends, Mrs. Aisha finally caught a break. It happened through a chance encounter she had with an old neighbor. She learned after their catching up of Mrs. Miriam's current whereabouts and how she could be reached. With a renewed sense of hope and purpose, Mrs. Aisha wasted no time in reaching out to her old friend, her heart racing with anticipation as she awaited a response. And when the moment finally came and Mrs. Miriam's voice filled the line, Mrs. Aisha felt a sense of relief, knowing that she was one step closer to uncovering the truth that had eluded her for so long. Armed with the knowledge of Mrs. Marian's current address, Mrs. Aisha began to make preparations, for she knew that the key to breaking the curse that had plagued her son might lay with her long-time friend. She wanted to go alone at first, since there was no confirmation of anything, and it was only her husband she told of her suspicions. He had insisted on going with her, despite her initial reluctance to have him accompany her. She couldn't deny the comfort and reassurance his presence provided, especially in the face of the unknown. And so, with a mixture of gratitude and apprehension, they had embarked on the long journey to the state, their hearts heavy with anticipation and uncertainty. As they neared their destination, Mrs. Aisha felt hope stirring within her again, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, she had her husband, and together as a united front, they would face anything. When they got to the given address, Mrs. Aisha stood frozen in front of the gate, her senses heightened by the eerie silence that surrounded the deserted-looking property. Despite her growing unease, she knew that she couldn't turn back now, not after coming this far in search of answers, thankful that her husband had prevailed upon her come along. As they stood confused, not knowing what to do, she decided to call the number she had used to speak with Mrs. Mariam a few days ago. With trembling hands, she dialed the number, her heart pounding in her chest as she waited for someone to pick up. When a voice finally answered on the other end, Mrs. Aisha felt a wave of relief wash over her. "Hello," a male voice answered. "Hello, please, can I speak with Mrs. Miriam?" Aisha answered with such relief. "Madam," the voice over the phone said, "I only gave the phone to Mrs. Miriam that day because of how urgent and insistent you had been. But I am sorry, I can't go back there again. You can go see her yourself if what you're looking for is that important to you, at the address that you were given." "But I am already at the address, please, and there is no one around," Aisha interrupted. "Oh, no one will be around except for Mrs. Miriam. The gate is always unlocked, so you can push it and go in. She should be where she has always been," the voice said. "Please, what do you mean?" "Madam, since you said you are there at the address, go inside and see for yourself." I am busy, please. The call was dropped. She exchanged wary glances with her husband, but they had no choice than to push forward. On entering the compound, the stench around the environment came stronger. They wore the nose masks that Aisha had bought at the shop just in case, she thought. They located the entrance door, and as she made to knock, her knuckles touched the door and it opened a bit with a creaking sound. They called out to alert whoever was inside, but after waiting for some minutes, there was no answer. They gently opened the door and went in. As they pushed the door further in and realized that the room was dim, and they both brought out their phones and switched on the light. Clasping their free hands together, Mrs. Aisha and her husband cautiously entered the dimly lit room, their hearts pounding in their chests. They were met with an overwhelming stench that seemed to cling to the air like a suffocating blanket. With their noses protected by the masks, they forged ahead. But amidst the darkness and the stench, they heard the sound of someone coughing violently, their distress echoing through the silent room. Driven by concern and a desire to help, Mrs. Aisha and her husband followed the direction of the sound, their footsteps faltering as they approached an adjacent door. As they pushed it open, what they saw left them speechless, their minds reeling with shock and disbelief at the sight that greeted them. Before them lay Mrs. Mariam. She was hardly recognizable, the once robust and beautiful form, now frail and racked with coughs, her eyes sunken and hollow with exhaustion. The room was in a state of disarray, littered with debris and filth that bore witness to the years of neglect and isolation she had endured. Mrs. Aisha was only able to recognize that this was her friend Miriam because of the big mole that was on the right side of her upper brows. Overcome with a mixture of horror and compassion, Mrs. Aisha and her husband had rushed towards Mariam's side, their hearts breaking at the sight of their old friend in such a pitiful state. With tears streaming down her face, Mrs. Aisha vowed to do whatever it took to help her friend. Aisha forgot temporarily why she had come on this long search, but as she made to make a call, Mrs. Miriam held her hand and indicated that she wait. But before she could go any further, another fit of violent cough gripped her again. When it subsided, she had tears streaming down her face, and she began to apologize to her old friend. Please, Aisha, I am so sorry for being such a wicked soul and an evil friend to you and your family. Please stop it, Aisha interrupted her. You only did what was necessary for you and your family. How does moving away to a better place be classified as an act of wickedness? She asked her friend, holding on to what was left of her hand, avoiding the rotting bones. Don't worry, we will get you out of here, and I will do my best to see what can be done for you. But Mariam was still crying and shaking her head. You don't understand. You don't understand, she kept saying. All right, please help us understand, Aisha's husband said. Do you remember the incidents that took place between us the day of your second son's 10th birthday? Yes, Aisha said, her heart skipping. Well, I was bitter about the way Yusuf responded to my suggestion. I acted as though it was nothing, but I felt embarrassed and bitter. When I couldn't get it out of my mind, I went to a Baba that I know, and he told me what to do to punish the arrogant boy. I came back that day and did all that I was asked to do, but he warned that I or my daughter must never set eyes on the recipient of the curse, or my daughter will die and I will suffer greatly. That is why I convinced my husband we relocate to avoid that from happening. Eventually, Hadiza was able to travel out of the country, and I became happy that the chances of them ever seeing each other had become slimmer. But 3 years ago, Hadiza called me on the phone very excited and told me that she saw Yusuf in her city, but that he was too far away from where she was so they couldn't talk. I knew then that Nemesis had caught up with me, I told Hadiza to get on the next flight home, but she was laughing at my theatrics, as she called it, thinking it was my usual thing about missing her. I couldn't tell her why. The Baba had died a few years before. I became confused, and I went to confess to my husband what I did, so that we can find solution to the problem. But instead, he threw me out of his house and married another. 1 week later, I received the corpse of my precious daughter. She had died in a ghastly motor accident. My world came crashing down. I was still too ashamed to call you to tell you what had happened. But a few weeks after my daughter's funeral, I started falling sick. Eventually, the people around me started relocating, leaving me alone in my own mess. I couldn't reach out to you because no one would come close to me until that kind former neighbor who brought his phone a few days ago. As Mrs. Marian poured out her heart, her words laced with regret and sorrow, Mrs. Aisha and her husband listened in stunned silence, their hearts heavy with the weight of her confession. The revelation of Mrs. Marian's role in Yusuf's curse sent shock waves through their minds as they grappled with the enormity of the situation. Tears streamed down Mrs. Aisha's face as she unconsciously removed her hand from her friend, sitting back, her heart breaking at the pain and suffering the one she had considered a good friend had caused. But with each word, the depth of Mrs. Marian's remorse became painfully clear, as did the magnitude of the consequences of her actions. In that moment of raw honesty and vulnerability, Mrs. Aisha felt a surge of compassion and forgiveness well up within her, as she realized that her friend had acted out of desperation and fear, driven to desperate measures by false ego and unrestrained anger. But before they could come to a conclusion of what to do about the battered woman, Mrs. Marian thanked them both for setting her free, and with her last breath told Mrs. Aisha what must be done to retrieve the vulture's sight from Yusuf, because that is what the curse was called, and she gave up the ghost. Mrs. Aisha had wept for what would have been, but they left the place, placing a call to a government agency, notifying them of what had taken place, so the body can be claimed by the state and given a burial in a public cemetery. Mrs. Aisha and her husband went back to their home and did as Mariam instructed. Immediately the water mixed with her tears touched the eyes of Yusuf. A scale-like substance fell off his eyes, and then they knew the curse has been lifted. The family shouted in jubilation. Mrs. Aisha later burnt the scaly substance, ensuring it became ashes, and then she washed out the ash into the gutter. She rejoiced and blessed God for rescuing her son from such bondage, but felt such sorrow at the innocent ladies that paid a price they knew nothing about. Their lives had been cut short by forces beyond their control. Their death a tragic reminder of the devastating consequence of unchecked anger and resentment. Yusuf carried the weight of those women on his shoulders, but this time they served as a reminder to him to cherish every moment he had and to value the love he was blessed with. In the aftermath of their ordeal, Mrs. Aisha and her family learned valuable lessons that would stay with them for a lifetime. They learned the importance of forgiveness and compassion, even in the face of unimaginable pain and suffering. They learned to cherish every moment they had together and to value the love and support of family above all else. But most importantly, they learned that true freedom comes from letting go of the past and its offenses and disappointment. For in the end, it was their unwavering faith and resilience that had seen them through the darkest of nights, shining a light of hope and redemption into their lives once more. Yusuf, after some years, had fallen in love with a very beautiful young woman called Halima. After seeing that Halima lived days and days after, he had confessed his feeling, and in no time their families were notified and the lovebirds were married. Together, Yusuf and Halima lived a happy and fulfilled life, surrounded by their loved ones, cherishing each moment as if it was their last. The end. Hi, family. Hope you enjoyed the story. I'm grateful for your consistency. If you are new, you are welcome to my channel, and I hope that you find what you are looking for. And I hope the time spent here is an enjoyable and worthwhile effort. The anchor scripture that this story brought to my mind is, "Who is he that declares? Who is he that speaks a thing and it cometh to pass when the Lord has not declared it?" It may look as if the curse that Miriam laid on Yusuf had a prevailing hand, but when you look at the other side, no man has the final say. Thanks for watching. Please, if you have not subscribed, do subscribe, like, and I would like to hear from you what your opinions are concerning this story. Bye. God bless you.